Data types. What is data type? Basically, each query that you bring into Power Query has one or more columns, and each column has a data type. You often see the data type expressed by a little symbol just in front of the column heading. Now, it's important that the data type is correct, and often when we import data into Power Query, only the first 1,000 rows are scanned. And so as a result, the data type that Power Query assigns to a column may actually not be correct. This is particularly significant and particularly likely if you're bringing in flat files like a CSV file, comma separated values file, or you're bringing in an Excel file, because the data in those types of files and those types of columns is entered by the user manually. And so the data type that Power Query decides that column is may not be correct. Now, they have to be correct. If we have an incorrect data type, this can prevent us from doing certain calculations. It can prevent us from creating relationships between queries. It can even prevent us from being able to do hierarchies. So it's important that we, best practice, go through each query and just check that the data types are correct. Okay. So what we can do, for example, is we can ask Power Query to detect the data type. You just select one or more columns. Maybe I select these 3 columns here, for example. And if I go to Transform in the ribbon, there is this button here to detect the data type of any selected columns. And so if I click this button, it basically checks the data type of these 3 columns, and it hasn't changed anything. It believes that these 3 columns are text, which is what the ABC represents. But I think what's more important is for us to be able to go through and check ourselves the data types. So I'm going to ask you to go to a number of queries, and we're going to change the data types. The first one I want to go to is the orders query. And here we see there's an order date. And in fact, there's a required date and a ship date also. Now, these 3 columns are not date time columns. There should not be a midnight entry in each of these columns. So Power Query has misinterpreted the data type for these 3 columns. And I'd like to make these 3 columns just date fields or date data types, not date time. Now I can do this by going to Home, and I can change the data type using this drop down here to just a date, because at the moment it's a date time. But I can also do it by hitting this button here, and there you see a list of the finite options as far as data types. You can see by the little symbol that this is believed to be a date time column, and I'm just going to change it to a date column, and you'll see all the midnight entries disappear and the symbol changes to indicate this is no longer a date time column. I'm going to do the same with these 2 columns. I'm going to change this one also to a date and also change this one to a date. So it's really easy to change the data types, and best practice is to go through your queries and look at the data types and make sure they are correct. Now there's a few others I want to change. In employees, for example, over here to the right, you can see that birth date and hire date are incorrect. So I could choose both of these columns and change the data type to say a date. And so now both of those columns are date. So you can do them individually or as groups. Now when I go to the order details query, there is actually a column in here called discount. And it's decided that it's a 1.2, and a 1.2 is a decimal number. So it's a number that believes that it has decimal places. And as I can see here, that's true. But to be more accurate, I actually want to show this data type as a percentage. So I'm going to hit the drop down, hit the button and choose percentage. And there they are now showing as percentages. So best practice, go through each of your queries, go through each of your columns. You could use the detect data type under the transform, but I think you should manually set them. You do have a finite set of options. Basically, a decimal number allows you to have decimal points. A currency format would allow you to have decimal places as well, but not as many. A whole number would not allow decimal places, and a percentage would show as percentage. A date time would show a date and a time, as opposed to just showing a date and just showing a time. You've also got time zone dates as well, which is quite handy as well, the UTC, date time format. You've also got duration, which is basically represents a length of time as a number. You've got text, which means it purely is alpha numeric characters. You've got true false, which means it's either true or it's false and it's nothing else. Binary is also an option, not so common. So there's your data types there.